I'm here to bring my list of forwards and defensemen for this year's draft. These are my rankings for overall in every category combined. So maybe some other players would be taken earlier than others in certain categories. And I also have the tiers list. So as you can see, the tier one and the tier one here, they correspond with each other well. So I would take, by having this tiers list, you can kind of convert defensemen, centers, and wingers all together. So what I have here is I have Nikita Kucherov, David Pastrnak, Nathan MacKinnon, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Austin Matthews, all in that tier one list. So I would not take any of them earlier than that. And in the tier two list is where I would take forwards in the second tier. So after all the tier one players are gone, then I would go to the tier two players, and that's where I would um, measure how valuable they are. Now, a lot of these forwards are hit or miss. Some of them are pretty much stable, have very high floors, and some of them are the opposite. Some of them have very low floors, and some of them have very high floors and then have very high reward if they actually hit what they're supposed to. So, for example, I want to say a player like Alex Ovechkin, he's getting older and he's got regression risk in terms of his age. So that is why I have him at number 5. I would normally have him at number 3 if he was not as old. If he just played just like he did last year, he would easily be one of the top 3. I think I would have him as a tier 1 winger, but not anymore. Um, yeah, and then let's actually start off with defensemen because this is going to be the longest list. I believe I've got the top 45 defensemen here, and I want to talk about my draft rankings. I will just show you guys the entire list right here. As you can see, very slowly I'm going down. I have John Carlson and Roman Josi, Dougie Hamilton, Victor Hedman all on the tier 2 list. Now, they're supposed to be going after all of these top tier 2 and top tier 1 and top tier 1 and top tier 2 wingers and centers because they are not that much different from the tier 3 defensemen. I know I have them separated, which is for good reason because I believe that these guys will consistently produce more than these types of players. But again, I'm saying that they are not players that you should be taking ahead of these other tier 2 players. But to compare it, I would probably take the tier 2 defenseman up here in the range of the tier 3 forwards, the top 3 forwards. So as you can see, I would take a John Carlson ahead of an Alexander Barkov, who is in tier 3. Alexander Barkov definitely has the potential to be one of the top players in this tier, just because he had an amazing season 2 seasons ago. And then you have Sean Couturier, who had an outstanding season a couple seasons ago as well. He could easily break out. Mark Scheifele is always a good breakout candidate because he always produces around a point per game. And if one year he has his shots way up, then he definitely has the potential. Now, for the tier 3 wingers, it's a lot longer of a list, as you can see, than the tier 3 centers, but that's just because I'm including both left wing and right wings here. And I also included Leon Draisaitl as a center, so you won't see him on the winger list at all. He would be a tier 1 winger if he was available there, but he's not. So I have these lists here for you guys. If you want to use them for your mock drafts and stuff like that, go ahead. Feel free to. I need to also add goaltenders, but I am really bad at predicting goaltenders because they are so hard to predict. That's why I think they are the most interesting players to pick, just because you don't really know what's going on. I can tell you who's starting and who's likely to start, but that's about it. So let's start here by talking about John Carlson, Roman Josi, Dougie Hamilton, Victor Hedman. Now, I think that they're all in the top tier in almost every single type of format, just because Dougie Hamilton's a goal scorer. His plus minus is probably going to be at least decent for Carolina. He'll probably produce a lot of power play points. He's on a very offensive, productive team. The Carolina Hurricanes are really stepping their offensive production up as of late. Before they were not very good fantasy candidates. Now they are absolutely one of the best candidates you could ask for. So I have him up here. The reason Victor Hedman is only in this tier is because he does so well in the plus minus category, and he's almost a guaranteed high plus minus player. And if he's not a guaranteed high plus minus player, then he will probably be in tiers 3 or 4, really depending on what he would do with his production, because he usually scores a lot of power play points and his plus minus is usually high. So in category leagues, he actually does do fairly well. Now, if you're talking about other category in other leagues like points leagues, like head-to-head points leagues, I would not take Victor Hedman this high. Again, it's all about these what settings you guys have, what scoring settings you guys have in general. So I have Cale Makar, Chris Letang, Brent Burns. Yes, Cale Makar, he is going to be a dominant force in terms of the goal category. He'll probably shoot a lot. His plus minus is going to be high. A lot of categories he fulfills in a lot of situations. I think maybe his hits will go up, his block shots will go up as he gets more comfortable in the league. Then I do not have Quinn Hughes. I know at number 13, that's a little bit rough of a ranking for him because he did produce so much. I actually have him leading the league in assists this season. So do not think I'm underestimating Quinn Hughes. I'm literally giving him the best the most amount of assists in the entire league for defensemen. So I don't think that's underrating him at all. I think that I'm actually maybe overrating him a little bit. But he is not destined to shoot, hit, or block too many shots. It just doesn't happen. In juniors he didn't shoot that much. In he didn't hit much in juniors. He didn't block too many shots in juniors. But he will get a lot of power play points. He will get a lot of assists. He will get a high plus minus, I believe, or at least somewhat near zero if he doesn't get a high plus minus. I don't think he's in too much danger of having a really bad plus minus. That's all I got to say about him. And I don't see him getting more than like 12 goals in an 82 game season. That's all I have for Quinn Hughes. But I really think he's very valuable, but I think he's going to get overdrafted a little bit in these drafts coming up. Now, another early pick for a rookie-ish player, a player that's kind of newer to the league, Tony DeAngelo. He's starting to dominate the league like he did in juniors a while back. He has had his anger issues back in juniors. I know he had some problems with teammates and stuff like that. Hopefully, it's not the case. I think that's why Arizona traded him, because of attitude issues. He could easily become a dominant defenseman in the league, but then also at the same time, he could be doing something else. But again, New York Rangers offense was kind of a little bit there was a little bit of variance with their offense because they did extremely well in a shorter season. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. If you think about 2 years ago back in Calgary, they had like a huge variance route with Johnny Gaudreau getting like 90 something points, and then this season he only had like a few, I think 60 or something like that, or not even a point per game player. So there are some teams that just dominate, and then you can just expect a lot of regression from their point totals the next season. So I really think that Tony DeAngelo's totals will actually be regressed quite a bit. I think I might be overvaluing him at number 9, but feel free to take him in this range. You can actually take him at the bottom of this range, in the bottom of the tier group. I would say around here if you really feel uncomfortable picking him early, and just let someone else pick him, and then you can get like a Tyson Barrie or Ryan Ellis for value there. So after you get down, as you can see, another name that pops out to me is Rasmus Dahlin, tier 5. He's just above Darnell Nurse. How does that happen? Darnell Nurse isn't he really even that known of a player. Rasmus Dahlin was a number 1 pick. So the reason why I have got these guys in the same range is because Rasmus Dahlin is probably not going to have the best plus minus. He's not going to have a lot of shots on goal. He never really does. His penalty minutes are not going to be very high. He'll probably have a lot of power play assists, a lot of assists in general, not too many goals. It's just kind of his style of play. He's a two-way defenseman. Darnell Nurse, on the other hand, he racks up penalty minutes a lot. I think he'll probably be high in the hit category as well. Block shots maybe too. I don't really remember. But that's the reason. There's a reason why they're in the same rank, because some categories they do better in than others. Neil Pionk, he is actually very underrated. I think he's actually a pretty good steal in this tier 5 category. I think that he's got the potential to break out even more from last season. He's still very young. I believe he's like 22 or something like that. And he's starting off as the Winnipeg's like number 1 defenseman. So we'll see how that pans out. He also has a lot of scoring players to work with, like Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele on the power play. So he'll probably get a lot of points this season, just like he did this past season. But he's still very young. He could easily up those totals from last season. Aside from that, I don't think anyone really sticks out. If you guys like this list, feel free to use it. There's through a lot of categories, but honestly, you might want to switch up certain players based off certain category rankings. I really wouldn't overestimate these like players like Quinn Hughes, players that don't really shoot that much and hit that much in leagues that involve that kind of stat. So let's move over to the center column, and I have Nathan MacKinnon, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Austin Matthews in the tier 1 section, which is pretty clear, I think, pretty obvious that those guys belong. Then you have a Jack Eichel, Mika Zibanejad, Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Steven Stamkos in tier 2. So anyone right through this, I think 5 through 9, I have in tier 2 category. Steven Stamkos, I question his injury issues. I just don't know if he's going to be fully ready for this season. If he produces like last season, I would actually have him at the top of this tier, but I have him towards the bottom of this tier just because of those issues. And then Evgeny Malkin, also injury concerns. Again, he always gets injured somehow. That's why I have him a little bit lower than Crosby. I would actually, if they were both uninjured players, I would have Evgeny Malkin above Sidney Crosby. And then I've got Mika Zibanejad right underneath Jack Eichel. Mika Zibanejad had a great season. I think that's a little bit of an outlier. I think he had a little bit of a lucky season. We'll see some regression from him, but not too much. I think you should expect him to be like an 84-point player. You know, someone that's going to score around 40 goals. I think that's about right. I think as many goals as he had before he got injured is probably about the expectation for a season-long play with Artemi Panarin on average. I think he had a little bit extra luck on his side for this past season, but I still see him as an offensive threat and an 85-point scorer. And then you have Jack Eichel, who could easily eclipse 100 points with Taylor Hall on his line, but he's also got some consistency issues, and he is on a bad team, so you really don't really know what you're getting with him. His plus-minus might be pretty bad again this season just because we really don't know about Buffalo. They didn't really change their defense that much. They added a lot of new players, but most of them were centers like Eric Stahl. I think they added Cody Eakin and they added Taylor Hall. So they got a big haul of a big haul of players for their team this season. But I just don't trust that whole system because they've always had more and more guys come in, players to fill roles, and then they just kind of give up throughout the season, and they just don't really work as a team. So we'll see how that work plans out. In tier 3, I have Sebastian Aho leading that tier right above John Tavares. Sebastian Aho is, I think, overdrafted in most leagues. I see him getting drafted above all of these guys, which I don't agree with, but at the same time, you know, Aho's never really a bad choice. I think his goals this season were a little bit higher than usual. He had a pretty high shooting percentage. We should see that go down a little bit, but he's also going to be playing with Andrei Svechnikov, whose totals will probably rise as well. So you could easily have him in this tier 2 group. If you want to take him over a Sidney Crosby, go ahead. It really isn't that big of a mistake. I think they're actually not that far apart in general. But again, Sebastian Aho is relying on other players to break out in order for him to move up a tier, I think. So I don't think that's very good to rely on him to do that. And then you have another player, John Tavares. He is going to be John Tavares, just like last year, just like the year before, hopefully more like 2 years ago, but we'll see what happens. He's always a good pick, never wrong. You can never go wrong with John Tavares. And then you have Patrice Bergeron. Patrice Bergeron got, as you can see, I downgraded him because of his age, and he's going to be playing with Brad Marchand possibly for the beginning of the season, and then we don't know who's going to be on his other wing. So I think I don't really know what's going to happen with that, but he's not going to have Pastrnak, who leads that line kind of, to bring his totals up. So I think he's below a John Tavares and a Sebastian Aho. But if he had Pastrnak and Marchand, just like last year, I could easily see him being a tier 2 or top of that tier 2 list. He's actually very good in terms of points per game or fantasy points per game. But the problem is we really don't know what's going to happen with him because of his age again, and Brad Marchand's aging as well. And then you have David Pastrnak, who's not injured until whenever, so he might not even be fully healthy. So that's why I downgraded him a little bit. I would definitely take these players above him, but he's still a very good option at number 12. Then you have Elias Pettersson. I think he's going to get overdrafted a little bit. Very, very talented center. He's on an upcoming team, Vancouver. They are probably going to be a top-tier team this season, or top-end team this season. Hopefully, Elias Pettersson can get up to the 80-point mark. He's been consistently a 65 to 70-point player. I think he was a point-per-game player this past season. I don't really remember, but he'll probably score somewhere on average per 82 games around 35 goals and then probably like 45 assists, something like that. He's kind of breaking out like David Pastrnak did when he first started playing, although Elias Pettersson broke out immediately. So we don't really know if he is at his height right now or if he still has a lot more room to grow. He probably has a lot more room to grow. If that would be my guess because he's only like 20 years old. He was only drafted in 2017, so he's still got a long way to go. We'll see what happens. And then we have Brayden Point, another player that's probably going to be overdrafted. He's around a point-per-game player, I would say. I would expect him to get like 84 points in the 82 games. High plus-minus, very good in category leagues, not so good in leagues that involve hitting and block shots and even shots on goal. He doesn't really shoot that much. That's why I have him. I think him and Mark Scheifele are about even. I would take Brayden Point ahead of him, though, because Brayden Point also has more breakout potential. Then you have Alexander Barkov, breakout potential as well. He had a kind of a poor season this season in regards to, if you compare it to seasons before. Sean Couturier, he broke out a few seasons ago, but I have him right at number 17. I think he could potentially have a really good season again, although I think he could easily be in this tier 4 group. I don't really, I put him in the tier 3 group because I think that on average he's scoring a little bit more points than these guys. I think these guys have a general average to how well they do in fantasy, and I think Sean Couturier is slightly above that, but I don't think that he's got the breakout potential that most of these guys do, so I think he's at the bottom of this tier. Makes sense. And then once you get into tier 4, this is where you get kind of the centers that you'll find at the end of the draft in a 12-team format. There's 30 centers here, and let's say there's 3 center positions. You need 2 centers to play and then 1 center on your bench. So that's 3 centers per team in a 12-team league, so that's 36. So more than likely, at least 3 of these guys will be available. I don't think many people will have the exact same list as this, and I bet there will be like 6 spare players outside of this that will get drafted before these guys. And there's nothing really wrong with that because all these tier 4 guys are, again, all in the same kind of level. You could probably name 10 more guys that could fit here, like Anze Kopitar could be in here. Really don't know. A lot of them have potential to break out of this tier into the tier 3 category, but I just don't see it. As of right now, I don't really see any of these guys really killing it. Travis Konechny is a guy maybe that comes to mind when it comes to players that could break out to the next level, just because he kind of had a breakout season this past season. But we'll see. Hopefully he gets more minutes and he can break out even more. Now let's move on to the wingers. So these are my wingers overall. I have Nikita Kucherov first tier, David Pastrnak in the other first tier, but he is injured, and I would have him above Kucherov if he was uninjured. Sadly, he is injured. I would still take Pastrnak maybe above an Artemi Panarin. In terms of forwards, I think if I were to pick in the late first round in a 12-team, 10-team format, I'm going to probably take a bundle of David Pastrnak, and if there's any tier 1 players maybe, or a tier 1 goalie, I think there's only a couple of those. I don't really know. Don't really follow goalies, but I would probably take a bundle of David Pastrnak with another elite tier 2 winger or another tier 2 center. But we'll see what happens. I don't really see him coming back until 5 to 6 weeks in, but I'd still have him as my second winger overall. Now we go to the second tier in wingers, and that's Panarin, Patrick Kane, Alex Ovechkin, Brad Marchand, Jake Guentzel. These guys are all. I think there's a big drop after this to Andrei Svechnikov. Andrei Svechnikov is a tier 3 winger. I think there's a huge gap between these two because I think Andrei Svechnikov is probably going to be somewhere around a 30 to 35 goal scorer on an 82 game season, but with like a lot of hits in a lot of other categories. He'd probably be good in like plus minus assists, power play points, a lot of other categories. But Jake Guentzel is already a 40 goal scorer per 82 games, and he does fulfill those categories already. So I think Andrei Svechnikov has the potential to be a tier 2 player, but he's just not there yet. And I have all of these guys lined up. I would actually have Alex Ovechkin in number 3. I think I said this earlier, but Alex Ovechkin is old. He's getting to the point where he could regress a lot in one season. He could drop from being a 50 goal scorer to a 30 goal scorer in a second, which scares the crap out of me. That's why I dropped him a couple spots. I'd still take him here. I'd take him above a Brad Marchand just because he's got so much potential. He's going to shoot a lot. He's going to hit a lot. Both those categories he really crushes well. His block shots I don't think are that great. His plus minus is probably going to be mediocre at best. He could easily have a really bad plus minus, but he does work a lot. He works really hard. He's going to shoot a lot still, even when he gets older. As he gets older, I see him getting around the 45 goal mark this season in terms of on pace for an 82 game season. So if we had 60 games this season, I think he'll probably score like 33 goals, but he still scares me. Then I've got Brad Marchand and Jake Guentzel. I just don't think that there's any question about these guys. They're both top tier 2 wingers. Brad Marchand is kind of aging out a little bit though. I think he's been playing better as he got older, but again, he's not going to be playing with Pastrnak for a good portion of the season. I would say a third of the season he's going to be missing Pastrnak. So we'll see how that goes. Now we've got Svechnikov, Mitch Marner, Taylor Hall, Mikko Rantanen, Jonathan Huberdeau. A big long line list of tier 3 forwards. You could argue that there's already a gap between Huberdeau and Paccioretty right here. I think that these forwards are claiming the title for that tier 3 spot. But then again, there are category leagues where some of these players aren't even close to as good as a Gabriel Landeskog or a Brady Tkachuk, but they're all kind of in the mix. If you really want the skill players like Mitch Marner, Andrei Svechnikov, Mikko Rantanen, Taylor Hall, Jonathan Huberdeau, and then I think Kyle Connor, those guys would be at the top for skill, but they are also lacking in some of the other categories in terms of like block shots and hits. Again, Kyle Connor is the black hole for hits and block shots. He does not hit at all. He does not block any shots. You're going to get a big donut when he doesn't score, get an assist, or his plus minus power play points, shots on goal are all low. When he's in a little bit of a rut, he's not going to be getting you any points. A big donut. That's what's going to happen when you draft him. But again, he is a 40 goal scorer, so he'll probably be scoring a lot every other game maybe. He just doesn't have as many supporting points in terms of for category leagues and stuff like that. So he might make your team suffer there. But that just tells you how good of a goal scorer and how many assists he's going to get for the season. I expect him to be about a point per game player. He's going to contribute a lot of the power play points. A lot of his plus minus is probably going to be pretty mediocre. He's going to shoot a lot. But I expect him to have another great season this season. So I have him right below Brady Tkachuk just because Brady Tkachuk is hit or miss depending on your league scoring settings. Again, he could be an absolute truck or he could be the opposite. He could be the dumpster fire in your team. The guy, like, why did I choose him as the 16th winger overall in this format? You really got to look at your format just to make sure. You can place these guys wherever you want, but this is my rankings based off all formats combined. So after all these forwards, nothing really to say. Mitch Marner plays with a SAC team. Taylor Hall is going to have Jack Eichel to play with, so he went up a tier. He was a tier 4 forward, I think, last season. Now Mikko Rantanen, obviously playing with Nathan MacKinnon, Jonathan Huberdeau, very talented player. But once we go down, here's the tier 4 list for all forwards. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Around here is all players here are all skilled, and they could easily become tier 3 players. Now, wingers are just so hard to navigate because some players just have a floor. Like I think Brendan Gallagher is just a very steady top of the tier 4 list. He's always been a top tier 4 forward, I would say. Tier 4 top end forward in terms of winger positions. I just think that he's always been this way throughout his whole career. Fillip Forsberg's been more of a tier 3, tier 4 kind of guy. He's always been either at the top end of tier 3 or top end of tier 4, so he kind of switches in between all of these. But again, Fillip Forsberg didn't really have the best season last season, so we really don't know what's going to happen with him. Jonathan Marchessault, pretty steady floor. Don't really see him going too high. Same thing with Tom Wilson. All these guys are pretty steady. Tom Wilson is really high in category leagues. He should be going way earlier than most people take him. Again, David Perron, Anthony Mantha, all these guys have breakout potential. Anthony Mantha, Alex DeBrincat. If you want me to tell you which guys in general, I'm going to tell you guys which ones have the most likely chance, the highest chance to get into the tier 3 from the tier 4. So I would say it's Alex DeBrincat, Kyler Yamamoto, Alexis Lafreniere, Kevin Fiala, Dominic Kubalik, Bryan Rust, Anthony Mantha, Brock Boeser, and Fillip Forsberg. I think those are the only guys here that could really break out into the tier 3. Elias Lindholm has slight breakout potential, but he's not going to be going anywhere above mid-tier 3, so I just don't really see him as a breakout potential player. He had an amazing season 2 seasons ago, I believe, but that was a little bit of an outlier. Again, I think they just had an amazing season. So if you really like this video, feel free to use this for your mock drafts. I can post these in the description if you want me to, but these are the wingers and centers that I have listed, and the defensemen as well. So this is just a general format. I think that these are better than Yahoo and definitely ESPN's. ESPN's rankings are complete garbage. They are worse than anything I've ever seen in my life. But I think Yahoo's rankings are actually pretty legit. So if you want to go there and take a look at theirs as well, and their general rankings, I think are pretty good. Well, thank you for watching and have a good day.